All right, good. Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. On behalf of Arthur Goldberg, Larry Feldman, and the Board of Directors of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County, we welcome all of you to this important conversation on racial equality and how our community can be engaged in this effort. We are proud of the work of our Jewish Community Relations Council and its terrific professional, Marissa Trowbridge. After serving several years as Associate Director, Marissa has taken the reins as Director, working hand in hand with our incredible JCRC Chair, Hakeem, and they have re-engineered our advocacy agenda to more expansively work on those issues steeped in Jewish values, but affecting all of our society. Today's conversation, sponsored by the JCRCs of Greater Miami, Broward, Palm Beach, and Sarasota, is about the pursuit of racial equality and equal justice. The Jewish community knows too well the price of bigotry, hatred, systemic discrimination, and murder. From our time in exile in Egypt, to the Inquisition, to the pogroms, and finally to the Shoah, the effort to wipe out Jewish life, culture, and existence by the homicidal Nazi regime. Because of our history, we can empathize with victims of racism, though many of us will never be able to fully understand all the aspects of it. But now as a community, we have a duty to use our experiences, our values, and our memory to help in a struggle that has gone on for too long, inflicted too much pain on so many, and caused too much damage to their hopes and dreams. One other note, we have shut off the question function of Zoom. Today is meant to be an informative and thought-provoking discussion. Several people have asked if we'd be discussing topics of Israel, BDS, or anti-Semitism. The answer is no. I won't be asking those questions of our guests. The Jewish community and the myriad of organizations led by the federations will continue to fund and speak out loudly when we see anti-Semitic acts and words occur on college campuses, at the UN, or wherever hate and bigotry are allowed to blossom. But today our nation is hurting, and the Jewish community has a role to play in understanding the issues and learning how we can help. I would now ask Hakeem, our chair of our JCRC, to introduce our guests, and we'll be back in a moment to moderate our discussion. Hakeem.
Thank you, Matt. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers this evening. Congressman Ted Deutch represents Florida's 22nd District, home to communities throughout the Southern Palm Beach County and Broward County. Ted's priorities include creating jobs in South Florida through strategic investments in infrastructure, education and research, strengthening retirement security for all Americans, and protecting the integrity of our elections. Ted is a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee, where he is deeply engaged in debates around major national issues, including criminal justice and civil rights and liberties, constitutional amendments, and gun violence prevention. Ted is the chairman of the House Ethics Committee, which is charged with enforcing the official standards of conduct in the House of Representatives. Ted is also the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee's influential Middle East, North Africa, and International Terrorism Subcommittee, where he leads efforts to strengthen U.S.-Israel relations, thwart Iran's malign activities and nuclear weapons pursuit, and advance human rights worldwide. Originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Ted is a graduate of the University of Michigan and the University of Michigan Law School. And Congressman Hakeem Jeffries represents the 8th Congressional District of New York, encompassing large parts of Brooklyn and a section of Queens. Serving his 4th term in the United States Congress, Representative Jeffries is a member of the House Judiciary Committee and House Budget Committee. Representative Jeffries is chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. He is the former whip of the Congressional Black Caucus and previously co-chaired the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. In Congress, Representative Jeffries has emerged as a tireless advocate for social and economic justice. Representative Jeffries worked across the aisle as the lead Democratic sponsor of the First Step Act, a strong bipartisan criminal justice reform bill, which is widely viewed as the most meaningful criminal justice reform effort in a generation, and has been actively involved in the passage of a number of other key pieces of legislation. Congressman Jeffries is a graduate of State University of New York at Binghamton, Georgetown University, and New York University School of Law. Representative Jeffries was born in Brooklyn Hospital, raised in Crown Heights, and is a product of the New York City's public school system. He lives in Prospect Heights with his family. Matt, thank you.
Thank you, Hakeem. Congressman Jeffries, I'm Matt Levin. I'm the president and CEO of the Federation. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for taking time, along with Congressman Deutch, in your schedule today. let me just jump right in. Legislation has been introduced to minimize police brutality and enhance police accountability. Can you both give us an up-to-the-minute report of where we're at, what the mood is in Congress, and is there bipartisan support going into the legislation?
I'll defer to the chairman.
Well, Matt, good afternoon. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Matt. Thank you for extending this invitation. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you and each and every one of the folks who have joined us from throughout Florida. And certainly I want to acknowledge Hakeem. Thank you for that very generous introduction. And my good friend, Ted Deutch. Now, I know members of Congress often will use the phrase liberally, my good friend, and we'll refer to my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from the great state of California, my good friend, the distinguished gentle lady from the great state of Texas. Most of the time we use the phrase my good friend, we don't mean it, y'all. But today, when I say my good friend Ted Deutch, I absolutely mean it. He's a phenomenal individual. I call him both a mensch and a big maca at the same time. And we appreciate his leadership in Congress and certainly what he does for the people in South Florida. More importantly, his contributions to the House Democratic Caucus and the country in the way in which he serves. And this is a tough moment for our country. Of course, you know, I represent a district in Brooklyn that has had experience with police misconduct, police brutality, police violence in tragic consequences. I think almost every member of Congress who represents a community of color throughout the country has had that kind of experience. And so, you know, we believe that this is the moment, hopefully, to rise to the occasion collectively and do something to create an environment where our officers work in partnership with the African-American community and every community in a manner that both protects public safety, but at the same time respects the humanity of all of us. And at the core, that's what the legislation is all about. More than 150 Democratic members are supporting the Justice in Policing Act. No Republicans at the moment have indicated that they are prepared to support our legislation. But Senator Tim Scott, a Republican from South Carolina, has indicated that in the Senate, he's working on legislation to address police reform and the need to train officers in a different fashion. And some of our colleagues in the House Judiciary Committee on the other side of the aisle have also indicated that they see the need for reform legislation to be introduced. And so hopefully, though we are at the beginning of the process, that suggests to me that we may be able to find common ground to get something done this Congress.
Congressman Deutch?
Yes, I think while I say nice things about Hakeem, my friend Hakeem, hopefully the internet, some of those internet challenges that we heard at the end, Hakeem, I'm sure you can work out. First of all, Matt, thank you to you and the Federation for hosting this really important conversation. And I feel privileged. I feel privileged to serve with Hakeem Jeffries, but at this moment especially, the leadership that he provides the whole House in moving forward and leading us and tackling this really important issue at a critical moment in our nation's history. It's just an honor to serve with him and stand beside him as we wage this battle together. Here's that we're at this moment is because for everyone who watched the video of George Floyd with the knee on his neck, the what we kept thinking to ourselves, and I know it's true for me, and I know it's true for so many people in the community, is that this keeps happening, and that it has to stop, and that we need to do all that we can to put an end to it. We have to provide accountability, and what the legislation tries to do is exactly that. It's to, as Hakeem said, it's to ensure that we have law enforcement that will keep our community safe, that every member of the community will be respected, which is why it ends racial and religious profiling by police officers. It's why it requires police officers to wear body cameras, and ensures that people whose rights are violated have the opportunity to pursue claims for violation of their civil rights. It seeks to actually make our communities safer by supporting innovation grants to help communities address public safety in ways that will strengthen the culture of law enforcement by, among other things, putting in place national accreditation standards that were developed by President Obama's task force on policing, having a nationwide database to collect data on police misconduct and use of force. All of these steps that we're trying to take are meant to ensure that every member of law enforcement, as a police chief told me last week, we just want to make sure that everyone honors the badge, and that for in those occasions where that doesn't happen, we just want accountability. And that's what I think people are demanding. That's what they're marching in the streets for. We have an obligation to respond to that, and I think this bill does it in a really thoughtful way. And I agree with Hakeem. I think ultimately I've had conversations with Republican colleagues. I think there is great support for addressing a lot of these issues. And as I prepare to head up to Washington for our Judiciary Committee hearing tomorrow, I think this is the continuation of a really, really important conversation that we all need to be a part of.
Congressman Jeffries, if you're back with us, and Congressman Deutch, I want to just kind of pick up on that same vein. Look, the last 2 weeks, the feeling in our community and across the country has been one of outrage and sadness. And it does feel, maybe because the election is staring us in the face, it does feel different in the sense that there is a momentum of change, at least being discussed in a way that we haven't seen before. So the question is, how can we as individuals in federations and as a community become the best engaged in helping the community? And Congressman Jeffries, you obviously have a large Jewish community. You've been interacting. You know them well. I know you've been supportive of Israel and all those things. So obviously, you have a sense. What would you like to see from our community in speaking out at this moment? And that's to both of you, whoever, Ted, I'm not sure if.
Well, there's a great history.
Oh,
it is closely together.
There you
go. There's a great history of the African American and Jewish communities working closely together. Certainly in and around the civil rights movement, it was a tremendous partnership. And even pre-civil rights movement, I had a meeting a few months ago with the Israeli ambassador, who had just told me that he had a conversation with the dean of Howard Law School and participated in a ceremony because at a time when there were quotas on members of the Jewish community from going to professional schools, medical schools, law schools, business schools, that historically Black colleges and universities, such as elite ones like Howard, opened up their doors to members of the Jewish community without welcome arms. And they commemorated that as well. So it's just been a tremendous partnership. And now at a time where so many people are hurting across the country within the African American community and beyond, I think being able to stand together in solidarity, particularly, Matt, as you outlined, given the experiences for thousands of years of the Jewish community and having to confront oppression and understanding in a very personal and intimate way what being systematically targeted means how painful it is and what the devastating consequences can be, as we saw as a result of the unthinkable, unspeakable Holocaust, the pogroms, the systematic targeting that has taken place, going all the way back to Egypt, as you laid out, Matt, I think is particularly powerful because of the moral authority from which the Jewish community can uniquely speak on this issue. And it's just really a continuation of a partnership that has been so incredibly important. I represent the 9th most African-American district in the country and the 16th most Jewish. And so I've got a friend and a colleague named Leon Goldenberg who always tells me, Hakeem, you've got the best of both worlds. And I absolutely feel that way during moments of joy and during moments of pain, because our diversity as a nation really is our strength. And seeing a movement that's being led in many ways by young African-American women, but a movement that is white and Black and Latino and Asian and Native American and gay and straight and young and old and citizens and dreamers and Christian and Jewish and Muslim and Hindu, believers and non-believers, really should give us all faith in the American experiment, that though we are not perfect, at a moment like this, we can continue our long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union. And the voice of the Federation, the JCRCs, the Jewish community, I think, will be particularly important for such a time as this.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Ted?
I mean, Congressman Jeffries has just so eloquently made the case for it. And I would just, as someone who got my start in politics through the JCRC and know that one of the things that we try to do in the Jewish community is to help others understand exactly what Hakeem just said. And all of the things that we try to do to make people understand that throughout our history, when people identify us as Jews and pass laws to discriminate against us and have targeted us, and which, as Hakeem points out, have led to being expelled from countries and have led to pogroms and ultimately to the Shoah. What we want is for other people to understand what that means to our community and how that weighs upon us all the time. And so here's a moment where my good friend and colleague from New York just confirmed for us what he already, that he gets that he understands that. These are the discussions that we have when we're together in Congress. And here's a moment for us to realize that we don't have the experience of coming to America in slave ships, and we don't have the experience of being slaves in our country, but we were once slaves in Egypt. We don't have the experience of segregation, although there are neighborhoods that we could not live because the deed restrictions kept Jews out. And we don't have the experience of mass incarceration. We don't have the experience that Hakeem and members of the Black community have internalized as part of their own experience that they just want us to understand and to address at this moment, so that we can finally begin to address the racial injustice in our own country. This conversation, and I think, is the reminder of exactly how much we have in common in fighting these battles, and why those protests that we've seen, as Hakeem points out, are being led so much by young people, and in particular young people of color and young Jewish activists. And so I think that we have a role, that every one of us in the Jewish community has a role to stand up at this moment and to acknowledge that while our experience is not identical, there is enough in our own experience and our own teachings about the importance of standing up and speaking out and pursuing justice that this is the time for us to do it.
I think you both hit upon this issue of demographics and the impassioned young people that are out there, young women, young men of African Americans and college kids. And we're seeing it in every community. We see the demographic split in our own community around issues related to Israel. You've seen it in Miami among the Cuban exile community. It is, and I guess I would direct this question first to Congressman Jeffries, is there a split in the strategy from those who came before Congressman Lewis's, those from the civil rights generation, to the younger generation in terms of strategy about how to get to racial equality, or the strategies of how to put the building blocks in place? Or do you as a leading member of Congress navigate those divides?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think Ted and I were once in a place where we were relatively younger members of Congress, and I think still on the congressional timetable, we're still closer to that
Very much so.
Category than others. But when we look at the generations that are coming up, activists and others, you know, I think about it, and I talk about it, and I'm going through a midlife crisis right now in articulating it. But we embrace the energy and the idealism of those young people of every race who want to see America live up to its promise, and words like liberty and justice for all, equal protection, you know, under the law, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These are classic core American values, and I think those young people want to see America really live up to them. And we embrace that enthusiasm and that idealism as well. There'll always be, I think, a difference in approach to achieve an objective. But I have seen among some of the young activists that I've had an opportunity to talk to, a real understanding of the need to petition the government aggressively. That's central to the First Amendment, but also to participate electorally and to work toward change legislatively, which is going to require some degree of pragmatism. And I've been encouraged by that broader understanding of how to bring about change, demand it in a very bold and uncompromising fashion, but also understand the vehicle to pursue it and achieve it in a complicated political and governmental landscape, the one that Ted and I confront. One last observation that I wanted to make, just picking up on some of the thoughts that Ted articulated in terms of the commonality and the capacity to have a common understanding of the struggles that we're working through now in this country. And I can think of no other community that would understand the pain that we feel having come to America since before America was America, before it was a country, come to our shores in chains 401 years ago, 1619, and to still have to deal with the legacy of slavery, legacy of Jim Crow, legacy of institutional racism, and understand that as much as we've embraced this country and we've come a long way, though we still have a long way to go, racism is in the soil of America. And we still have to deal with that dynamic. In the same way, I would argue that anti-Semitism lives in the soil of Europe. And the only community that can understand that phenomenon is the Jewish community. Things have gotten better in Europe. Anti-Semitism is still in the soil, in country after country after country. And that's kind of what we're dealing with here in America. And one of the reasons why the alliance is so important, authentic, and intimate, because of a common understanding that almost nobody else can internalize in the way that our two communities can.
Ted, did you want to add anything, Congressman Deutch?
I would just add that Hakeem and I have the incredible honor of serving in the United States House of Representatives alongside John Lewis, and whom you alluded to earlier, Matt. And John Lewis is a hero. He's a civil rights icon. He's
the ultimate hero.
He's committed his life to the pursuit of justice, and I think what we all realize is that, as Hakeem alluded to, and Hakeem and I like to do this a lot, so I won't miss the opportunity. While we may still be on the younger side for Congress, we recognize the leadership that's coming from young people who know of John Lewis from the history books, who maybe are familiar with the photo of Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel marching together in Selma, who maybe know about how the KKK murdered James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, all of whom were working together to register Black voters in Mississippi. There is a lot that's known from the history books, but there is currently history that is being written, and young people may have that sense. They may have a general understanding that the Black community and the Jewish community have this deep history and these roots, and they may and that may inform what they do. But they also know that the gunmen in Charleston went into that church to kill Black people, and the gunmen in Pittsburgh went into the synagogue to kill Jews, and that hatred fortunately is unique, and it's something, unfortunately, that we share, and they understand that overcoming hatred requires us to work together to do that, and as we fight racism, that racism that has been, as Hakeem so eloquently phrases it, in the soil here, that we're out critically going arm in arm as we attempt to confront it and change it and raise up our society for their generation as they step into the leadership roles that so many of them have already claimed.
So let me turn our attention to one last piece, and let me bring it back to Minneapolis for both of you. The Minneapolis City Council members they announced plans to defund the police department. What is protection of public safety going to look like under that circumstance? Is this something that's talked about in Congress, something potentially be adopted nationally? What do they mean when they defund the police? This is literally an education for us in terms of what that language would look like from a legislative perspective.
Thank you for that question. And the Justice in Policing Act doesn't contemplate any defunding of local law enforcement. Every town, every county, every city, every municipality, every locality is going to have to debate that question in terms of what is the right investment in public safety and what is the right investment in public education or public health, public transportation, public housing, the other public goods. And I think when you take this whole notion of defund the police outside of the sloganeering and the efforts by some to try to exploit it for political reasons, at its core, it involves a debate about what functions should the police be performing. And I think there's broad agreement, certainly in Congress, and even amongst some of the activists, that there is a role to be played in terms of public safety for law enforcement, but that there are other functions that they have been called upon to perform, dealing with individuals who are mentally or emotionally disturbed, dealing with situations that are anchored in drug addiction, or dealing with circumstances that require a social worker, not a law enforcement professional, that we as a society in many ways have failed our officers by calling upon them to do things that they are not equipped or trained to do. And so I think what we envision in the Justice and Policing Act is trying to make sure that we support proper training of police officers, that we support the good police officers who are in the community to protect and serve, while at the same time make sure that those officers who are violent or brutal or abusive, who cross the line, sometimes repeatedly, that there are mechanisms in place to hold them accountable, for them to be identified, and for them to face consequences so that the deterrence and the culture changes so we can move beyond the vicious cycle that we've been in, where there's just incident after incident after incident, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. I think society hopefully has arrived at a point where enough is enough, and we have to do things differently. That is what our hope is in the United States House of Representatives.
Congressman Deutch? Congressman Deutch?
Yeah, I think Hakeem explained that really well. I would just add this to really emphasize a point that Congressman Jeffries made. For the $120 billion or so that's spent on law enforcement, the conversation that we're having now is, yes, about accountability, but it's also about public safety. And when Chairman Jeffries points out that it may be, as local governments start to look at where funding goes, it may be better for the police departments, better for the majority of law enforcement officers who are out there protecting and serving and doing a good job, and better for public safety overall if some of those functions are carried out by people who might be better equipped to address them. And so, of course, law enforcement is going to continue to play the role to keep our communities safe. But if there are some things where it would be appropriate for, as Hakeem points out, for a social worker to play a role, where someone can intervene and help a family with skills that are very specific that a police officer might not have, that's going to actually make the police officer do his or her job better. It's going to give that other professional the chance to intervene in a way that can address a situation that might otherwise lead to violence, and can really help keep our communities safer. So I know there are those for whom they would like nothing more than to have a conversation suggesting that this effort is somehow about something other than maximizing accountability and respect for everyone in the community, addressing racial justice and keeping our communities safe. But that is what this debate is about, and that's why it's such an important discussion. That's why tomorrow's hearing, I think, is going to be so critical.
Congressman Jeffries, our good friend Congressman Deutch made me promise to keep your train running on time and not keep you too long. Let me ask you both to make a closing statement. And Ted, let me turn it over to you, and we'll give Congressman Jeffries the last word, and then I'll come back with a closing statement. So, Congressman Deutch.
Well, Matt, thanks, and I especially want to thank Hakeem Jeffries for people who know me well, who hear me talk about my work that I'm privileged to do in Congress. You'll know that what I like to talk about most is the privilege I have of working with a group of really dedicated and smart and passionate public servants, and to be able to find that combination with someone that you also really like and enjoy spending time with, and can share the kinds of passion that committed to these issues that Hakeem and I do. That's a special honor, and I'm glad that my community, Matt, and South Florida, for those of you who had not had a chance to hear from Hakeem now, can appreciate all of the things that I've said about him since I've had the privilege to serve with him. I want to thank, again, I want to thank the Federation for doing this. And I'll finish with this. There is a moment that exists now where everyone in the community, young and old alike, are focusing on the value of every human being. And I know it sounds like something that we should do all the time, but there is now a focus as a result of what happened to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and so many others. There's now this focus on addressing a very real problem that has existed in our country for hundreds of years. And as we go forward from here, there will be those who try to divide the country, who will try to make us walk back from the commitment that all of us felt over the past couple of weeks in responding to this. They'll try to sow discord. They'll try to turn one against another. And I just am so grateful for this opportunity, because this discussion is a reminder that the community stands together, the Jewish community stands together, and the Jewish community stands with the Black community in addressing the racial disparities that have plagued our country, and specifically tackling the very challenging issues of racial injustice. We all have that obligation, and this conversation is one that can't end with this Zoom call or with the passage of legislation. It's a conversation that we need to continue having with each other and with those throughout the entire community, Black and white alike, for the coming days and weeks and months and years. There's so much at stake, and I'm so proud of the community for coming together this way to address it. And Matt, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Jeffries, some closing remarks?
Well, Matt, thank you once again for convening us. I want to thank the Federation. So many people, hundreds of people, taking the time out to participate in this conversation. Of course, I'm so thankful for Chairman Deutch and his friendship and his advocacy, his advice, his counsel, his support. He's one of the reasons why I have the ability to serve now as chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and we work closely together on a variety of issues. We both serve on the Judiciary Committee. We've been partners and allies there. And of course, we worked on issues of importance to the pro-Israel community. Ted is the leading voice with respect to issues of the important U.S.-Israel relationship from a value standpoint and strategic standpoint. And it's been an honor to work closely with Ted in that regard. And to tell you the truth, it's been so wonderful over the last few days, even in the midst of these difficult times, to hear from so many of my friends within the pro-Israel community, not reaching out about Israel, but reaching out about what's happening in America with the Black community, to stand with the Black community unprompted. And you know, that really has been something that I've greatly appreciated, and it's being done authentically. You know, in closing, I'll just say that I represent, amongst a very diverse district, more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the country. In the 1970s, when the first wave of then Soviet immigrants came to America, they came to Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. And that's where I represent so many from the community, and of course spread out from there. And then once the Iron Curtain fell, a second wave, some went to Israel, many came to Brooklyn, and then spread out from the country or throughout the country thereafter, but still represent the highest number of Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the country. And when I think about that and think about this moment, in the 1960s, of course, Dr. King anchored in the premise that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, famously participated in, helped to convene a conference call with Jewish rabbinical leaders from across the nation to speak specifically about the oppression of Soviet Jews. In the midst of the work that he was doing in the context of civil rights and battling Jim Crow here in America. And I draw lessons from that. I also draw lessons from the fact that part of the district I represent was once represented by a former prominent Jewish congressman named Emanuel Seller, known in Brooklyn as Manny Seller, who was first elected in 1922 and actually served for 50 years, perhaps the longest serving Jewish Congress member in history, one of the longest serving members of Congress in history. And he was there with Truman when the United States was the first country to recognize the new state of Israel, and was widely regarded, much like Ted Deutch is today, as one of the leading voices of the relationship between the United States and Israel. But what's not known by too many folks about Congressman Manny Seller is that in the 1960s, he was chair of the House Judiciary Committee that Ted and I serve on right now. And as chair of the House Judiciary Committee, played a prominent role in passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And if you go to the Library of Congress, whenever there are displays about the civil rights movement, they note the role, often unheralded legislatively, that Congressman Manny Seller played. And I draw lessons from that as well, because at the same time that Dr. King was battling racism in America, he took time out to speak to the oppression that was important to deal with as it relates to Soviet Jewry. And at the same time that Manny Seller was leading within Congress the new state of Israel as it developed, dealing with the challenges that Israel still faces from a security standpoint in the tough neighborhood, he took the time out to focus on some of the concerns that America was grappling with as it relates to Jim Crow and trying to defeat that institution that is inconsistent with our values as a country. And as we deal with these things today, anchored in those relationships, where I now have an opportunity to represent both African Americans and members of the Jewish community, I know that despite what we face, the best is yet to come, and together we shall overcome.
Congressman, thank you so much for your time, your effort in doing this today. We're really, really grateful. Our community is ready to stand and be counted on this issue. And to you, Congressman Deutch, we never take for granted your leadership or yours that of Congressman Jeffries. Everybody who gets elected to office serves the people, and we know you give great sacrifice in doing so. So thank you to you both for what you've done and what you continue to do for our country and for our community. To all of you out in the audience, this has been a program by the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County in conjunction with our 4 Federation and 5 Federation partners. Please remember that it's your Federation and the JCRCs that are going to continue to be the convener of how to build a Jewish community that's for the past, the present, and for the future. We need your help and your participation. Please feel free to call any of the organizations on the screen and figure out how to get involved in this important effort that we've been discussing today, and how do we make us a better world and a better tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.